Welcome, everybody. My name is Jim Tinger. I am the CEO at Heart of the Customer and overall CX Geek. I have some friends along for today. You may notice you got an early invitation that Carrie is going to join us. She's not able to, so I called some friends of mine, and we're going to have a great panel here. I'll introduce these friends in a minute, but first I'm going to share some best practices around closing loop, the topic of today's conversation. And then we're going to open it up to our friends here to share which of these practices do they embrace, which ones would they like to embrace, but due to limitations can't, which ones maybe they disagree with. I don't know the answers. We'll find out together as we do this. Let me share a little bit first about some of the best practices about closing loop, and then I'll introduce you to our panel at that point. So let me go ahead here and share the presentation. So I'm getting up the presentation right here. There we go, the slideshow, and let's go ahead. All right, so now we're going to talk about closing the loop, how to win with great customer response programs. So a few best practices here for introduce a team. Now, many of you have seen this. This is the Bain closed loop slide that we have the inner loop where you respond to an individual customer. You have your huddle. Then you go to the outer loop where you take the themes and you do something about them. And this is my overall perspective right here is that this is unnecessary jargon. Inner loop or outer loop. We have some clients that say, I hate that phrase, Jim. Stop using those phrases because the business has no idea when it's inner, when it's outer loop. Our teams probably use those. Our folks here today probably use those phrases. I like to say instead, responding individually or responding organizationally. The inner loop is where if Brandon had an issue, I call him back and talk to Brandon about what happened here. And then the outer loop is if Sam and Peter had the same issue, we'd say, okay, we've got an issue overhead. Let's respond to it. So that's the basis of inner loop. When somebody has an issue, a customer has an issue, typically reported through a survey, do we respond to them and do we do something about it? Now, if you're not familiar with Customer Gauge, I can't speak to their platform, but their thought leadership is tremendous. And I'm going to bring in some research from their Customer Gauge's State of the B2B Account Experience. A couple years old, but really great data. One of the things they found when they did a survey here is they look at, do you close the loop? That 20% of companies, and they specifically focus on B2B, never close the loop. You see another 19% for extreme cases, only 20, basically 1 out of 4 does it for all customers. My experience is that's overstated. That many B2B programs rarely close the loop. And that's a real opportunity. And we'll see why that's such an opportunity. That when we look at the median NPS and Customer Gauge, their clients use NPS quite a bit. The same information applies, or the same learnings apply, even if you don't use NPS. They get much better scores if they do close the loop. Because, of course, they're finding out what the issues are and they're addressing them. Also, more importantly, it saves customers. Those clients that close the loop with all customers, they found have 8.5% better retention. So it's not just a feel-good thing. If you ask a survey, you're making an implicit promise that you're going to do something. If you don't follow up, you're essentially saying, just joking, we're not doing anything, at least as far as your clients know. And close, it's not just closing it, it's actually closing it quickly shows you care. As you can see, 27% by 1 out of 4 respond to the loop within 2 days. Another roughly quarter does it within 3 or 4, really 3 days, and almost half, it takes more than 3 days to respond. But what they saw is the faster you respond, the higher the NPS scores. Now, I love this graph because it makes it look like there's a huge gain if you close it within 48 hours. Those who are good at stats will look at that and say, Jim, that's a 1-point difference. It is a 1-point difference, but it's over a large sample size, so it matters. But responding quickly helps you. And then the other part is do you set a goal for closing the loop? And you can see that 62% say, no, I don't set a goal. 15% set it on speed. 9% on coverage, 14% cover on both speed and coverage. How many people are going to do and how quickly they're going to respond? So there's a little bit of background there on some good information from Customer Engage. Now let's get to why you're really here, which is not me. It's for our panel. We have a B2B expert, a B2C expert, and a B2B2C expert in our Brady Bunch style window here. And I'm going to start with Samantha or Sam. Introduce yourself, and then we'll move on to Peter and then Brandon. So Samantha, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm today's B2B expert per Jim's intro, and have been in this space for close to 4 years now. I am a sole practitioner at my company. We are a construction management firm based out of Kansas City is where I'm at, but we work regionally all over the Midwest and do some national work as well. And we launched our program. I kind of started spearheading this program, like I said, about 4 years ago. So we're a few years in, and I'm excited to talk more about how we close the loop.
All right. Thanks, Sam. Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'm coming to you live from the 19th floor of the U.S. Bank Plaza in downtown Minneapolis. You can see the government center behind me, and I've been at U.S. Bank for 5 years now. I lead our contact center Voice of the Customer program. Very complicated and intricate B2C survey program with millions and millions of customers and millions of surveys a year. Before I came to U.S. Bank, I actually ran my own Voice of the Customer vendor for close to 20 years. So I've been in this space for far longer than I care to acknowledge, and I will readily admit that many of my gray hairs come from this work.
Thanks, Peter. So Peter will be representing the B2C component, although he has a lot of experience in B2B and B2BC as well. And Brandon.
So I don't know how to follow up Peter's comment because I have no hair anymore. So maybe I've just endured a lot. So hi, I'm Brandon Cagnon. I'm the VP and Head of Customer Experience for American Modern Insurance. We are a specialty carrier, so we basically insure a lot of the things that your standard carriers don't. And I've been with American Modern for 6 years. I've been doing CX for 15 years, and I've been in the manufacturing space. I've been in consumer durables. I've been in automotive professional tools, and now in insurance, which I feel has given me a nice perspective on how CX can apply itself across industries with really a standard set of tools and standard approaches and philosophies that just modify a little bit to the business. And so I think I'm representing B2B2C today, but I've also done B2C and B2B2B. So hopefully I can help you enlighten on some things today.
All right, thanks. Well, before we get specifically in closing the loop, obviously that depends on what you're closing the loop for. And most commonly, that's a survey. Doesn't have to be, but that's the most common answer. Can you share each of you a little bit about where you do surveys today, or the program that you're closing the loop for? Then we'll come into more specifically about closing the loop. So let's go the same order. Let's start with Sam and tell us about where you listen today.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm with a construction company. We're a general contractor, so we're kind of leading our clients through that construction journey. So we have two different survey mechanisms where we're listening. We do a twice annual relationship survey that's going out to clients that have active work with us. And then we also have a more project-based survey tool that's going out to specific project team leaders over the cadence of the project. So those are kind of the two primary survey mechanisms that we're then getting feedback and needing to close the loop on. And then we also do a number of in-person interviews and qualitative listening and interviews that I do a number of those personally. And then we also have other members on our team who are kind of tasked with those. So we get some qualitative feedback from those that also requires a robust closed loop. Jim, you hit mute, so we lost you.
Thank you. So if, by the way, you're not on mute, but you want to raise a question, if you just put a question in the LinkedIn, we will see it here and we will bring it in front of our panelists. So feel free to ask questions as we go. All right, Peter, where do you listen?
Oh, well, U.S. Bank has very, very extensive program of customer listening. Contact center is just one component of it, where we follow up as, you know, as one would expect after a customer dials into one of our many contact centers. We also have branch listening programs. We have digital listening programs. We have relationship programs. We have listening after customer onboarding. We do a number of special projects as well. So it's all over the place. I think in aggregate, across all of our customer experience, we complete several million surveys a year. So it is very, very large, and sprawling would not be an inappropriate word.
All right. Brandon.
Yeah, so I buy into what Jim talks about as well, as VOC being multidimensional and not just surveys. And so from a surveying perspective, we have listening posts across both our agent network and to our policyholders directly. And so we listen through the entire journey, and even one of the cool things I think we do from a policyholder perspective is we even have a cancellation survey where we actually ask people after they've canceled with us why they did that, so we can kind of see where the business is shifting and for what reasons. But then we also passively detect a lot of our digital data from interactions with our website. We monitor call transactions for both text and sentiment. And then we do a lot of primary research, including agile user testing, where we're actually getting concepts out in front of users potentially before we brought them to the market to get that feedback back and integrate it into our product and service development. So those are all the ways that we actively listen.
All right. Well, why don't we stay with you, Brandon? We'll go backwards regarding how do you close the loop? Do you do it? Does your team do it? Does the business do it? Do you have an intern do it? How about you go about closing the loop?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so what we have found to be effective for our organization, we have, by the way, a centralized CX function in our organization. So my team encompasses all of our experience design, including UX and service design, as well as our customer research and knowledge, which includes our VOC platform and all of our strategy and organizational enablement. So as a centralized group, we partner a lot with our functional areas. And so for closing the loop for us, particularly with our VOC platform, we have case management in place. And so what we do is we collaborate with the other functional units, depending on where we're getting that feedback at. We set the parameters for what will trigger a case. And then when that case is generated, that goes to people that are assigned within those functional areas to close the loop. And then they all have their own separate SLAs, depending on whether it might be a claim follow-up or a customer service follow-up.
Okay. Just a quick follow-up on there. Did you say you're doing it within your survey platform? Is that the tool you're using for that? Okay.
Correct.
All right. Peter, how are you doing it?
Yeah, well, we have an extensive dedicated inner loop team. It's basically a small for us outbound contact center with dedicated specialists who reach out to customers after a closed loop is triggered. And there are some business lines, some of our units where they've decided that they would rather do this internally, but most of the company has decided that they would prefer to be with the centralized inner loop team. Being a bank, we do have regulatory requirements that we have to worry about, and complaint management stuff where there's very specific and particular rules that need to be followed. And just having that in a centralized team where they are specialists and experts on not just solving customer issues, but how we make sure that we stay right with our regulators is definitely a value add for that team.
All right. And similar question to Brandon, do you do it in CRM? Do you do it in the platform itself? How do you manage that whole process?
Yeah, so we use the same platform as we use for surveys for triggering and ticketing those closed loop incidents. However, depending on what comes out of that, so for example, if we have a regulatory complaint that we have to issue and manage, there's an enterprise platform that is just for tracking regulatory complaints. So there are a variety of platforms used, but the trigger and the tracking for the closed loop itself is within the same platform.
Okay. And Sam?
Yeah, so we are dealing with a much smaller volume of concerns and tickets than either of you are. So we take a very personalized approach, and we actually have a very relationship-based and personalized business, because truly the service that we are selling is our people. It's our project managers, our construction leaders. So we have an individualized follow-up process for each of the concerns that comes in. So I follow up directly with every person we get a survey response from or get any feedback from. At the very beginning of our program, I actually wrote personalized thank you notes to every single one. We don't do that now, but when we launched it, it was like we want people to know that it really matters, that we really are listening. So I still do, kind of like an automated thank you, letting them know all of our leaders are reading their comments, and then we kind of assign responsibility, who that client representative, that relationship owner is, and they do the follow up. We are still working on getting to where we are closing the loop with all of our customers. We prioritize concerns and complaints first, but we are working towards where we're having that follow-up process with every customer. And then just to answer what I think is going to be Jim's follow-up question, we currently are managing that through our CRM. But we actually just engaged with Hire the Customer to help us kind of explore what scaling could look like for us, because we are not at the place where I can write individual thank yous to every single customer now. And so we're looking for a survey platform that will enable us to probably include some of that ticketing instead of just managing it with me managing it in our CRM.
And I think, Sam, put you on the spot a little bit about one of the things you do that was not scalable for the other two is that you actually go out and interview a number of your clients. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of my job. So after we go through kind of a survey process or a sequence, I sit down with the leaders of our company and we identify whether we got a survey back from clients or not. If we think there was something left on the table, that they didn't say something that they were wanting to, or if it's a client where we didn't get a survey from or we didn't get feedback from and we really want to, I then do a personal outreach to those folks and do a qualitative listening interview with them. I have a really great response rate on that, like higher than 50% of people that I make that outreach to say yes and take that interview. And then we're able to really dig in, get some deeper learnings, and kind of help that client feel really valued, because we do value their time and we're trying to get that deeper feedback from them.
All right. I'll come back to you, Carol, in a minute, but we're still on the responding individually. Aaron asked, do you close the loop for positive feedback from customers? Why or why not? And so you kind of addressed that already, Sam, but Peter, who do you close the loop for?
Yeah, so we do not do a personalized close the loop for positive customers. There are cases where we'll send them an automated thank you for your feedback type of email. Being a bank, we want to be good stewards of your money, not our money, but your money. And, we're very focused on what's cost effective. And one of the things that we found is that just the percentage of customers who would engage with us when we reached out with them was, unless they had a specific problem that needed to be solved, it was kind of not worth the expense of doing that reach out. So we are selective in who we reach out to.
Okay. And Brandon?
Yeah, same. And for many of the same reasons, it's just tends to not be cost effective to close the loop with everybody, including your positives. The other thing is to be very mindful of the intent. What is the purpose of your voice to customer program? What is the intent of closing the loop? And so for us, it is primarily to mitigate difficult experiences than to reinforce positive ones. And so we'll prioritize that from a closed loop perspective when we decide where to apply our resources.
Okay. Another approach I've seen, one we use with a lot of our clients, is if they leave so much feedback in the open-ended. So our rule, I think, is usually 80 characters. They leave more than 80 characters worth of feedback. We'll also add that to closed loop because it seems like they have something to say. So it's an approach we've used in the past. So Ethan actually followed up there. So if the closed loop owners don't comply or don't complete a follow-up, do you have an escalation path, or what do you do then? Now, it sounds like in Peter, your case, that's pretty prescriptive because it's done by people who that's their full-time job. Mm-hmm. Brandon, who follows up for you?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. So we don't necessarily have a formal process where we kind of hold accountable people for meeting a closed loop. But because we're distributing the responsibility to do the closed loop to the functional areas that the survey applies to, they typically will have that in their own SLAs, and they'll have that in their own reviews. For example, a supervisor who gets feedback on a claims adjuster will have that as part of their standard cadence, that they're reviewing cases that were received by somebody within their team, and then following up to ensure that that case was closed. And so that's definitely one of the mechanisms that we use. Now, we even at times will turn off case management. So, for example, if we have let's say a hurricane hits Florida, we just know that the capacity for our field adjusters, we need them out there adjusting claims and helping people directly who have been impacted by a really severe event, right? That maybe has displaced them out of their home. That's more critical in those moments than to use their capacity to close the loop. So that we even have the flexibility to be able to turn that off at times as we need.
I suspect everybody who's currently experiencing that hurricane appreciates the fact that you don't want their folks distracted. So that makes a lot of sense. Lori asked about doing closed loop beyond surveys. So do you have or want to have closed loop from other channels, such as social media?
I can jump in there. We again, it's very manageable for us. We have a single person on our team who is our social media or a digital media manager. And so she's the primary accountability for that. So she'll bring in any comments or concerns and then elevate them as necessary. So we do, if there's any concern or whatever that comes in through any of those channels or through our website, we handle those as well in a similar fashion.
I want to follow up that just a second before we go to the others. So being a construction company, I'm just interested in what social media platforms are you on?
Yeah, good question. We're not on TikTok yet, in case you were wondering. We have talked about it, but no, we're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. We do have an Instagram, and then we've got our website.
Yeah. Wow, excellent. All right, back to closing loop based on web or other social media feedback. Peter, I'm guessing that's somewhere else in the organization?
It is, you know, we do have social media monitoring. It's not actually part of the organization that I'm in. It's a slightly different silo, and I don't have a ton of visibility into what they do. But you know, the other thing I'll just mention is we have a ton of non-survey CX listening channels, and it's not just you know what people are saying, but we do a lot of behavioral observation as well. Ooh. Obviously, we don't close the loop on that, but because if customers aren't directly reaching out to us, I think it'd be kind of creepy to say, hey, we noticed you called us 15 minutes after you left a branch. I think people would be weirded out by that. But, you know, we are getting a lot of that feedback, and, you know, there's open questions there that are worth thinking about. You know, does it make sense when we see behavioral patterns among customers that seem to be unexpected or look like they're creating more effort than they should? You know, should we be doing some loop closing either to solve the customer's issues proactively, or should we be, you know, trying to understand root cause? I think it's worth asking those questions. We don't have answers to those questions internally right now, but they're questions that are definitely worth answering, and we're getting more and more capability to do that.
Brandon?
Yeah, for us, we have very little social feedback. And so we do have a process in place that is managed by our customer service team in conjunction with our social media and digital marketing team. It's outside of CX, but we get so little social feedback over a year that we haven't incorporated that into our closed loop program per se, only because the volume is so low.
And Brandon, remind me, who actually closes the loop in your organization?
The functional areas who the feedback applies to.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about that, because we've had clients, we do a lot of conversation about, do we close the loop centrally? In case of Peter, that's so much volume, I think that makes no choice to do anything else. I know, Sam, we've talked a little bit about that in your organization as well. Do you have it done centrally, such as in the CX group or the customer service group, or do you have it done out in the field where they're closer to the problem, but they also have a lot of other things going on. Did you go through a lot of conversations about where that should sit?
Yeah, I mean, initially we did, and fortunately, it was pretty easy to figure that out. In part because our claims team was really the first team that launched surveys with their customers, and so they were already looking at case management as something that they wanted very early on. As we spread to the rest of the organization, what we have is a structure where we assign, we call them experience champions, and so functional leaders that are predominantly responsible for certain phases of the journeys are then also responsible for closing the loop for feedback that applies to their phase of the journey. And so it was a really natural fit. And so it was pretty seamless to have those functional leaders, those experienced champions, really step up to be able to own the closed loop for their group.
And if anybody out there is saying, I've heard that experienced champion somewhere before, you know that Brandon was actually on a webinar with us about 3-4 months ago where he talked more about that program. So good to have you back.
Sure.
Let's see. Last question I have regarding what the jargon is inner loop, which I call responding individually, is do you set coverage and time goals for closing the loop? We saw from the customer engagement research that very few set goals for both. Are you in that path? Where do you sit in terms of setting goals both for coverage, all customers, some coverage, et cetera, and response rates or response times, I should say? Who'd like to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in. We oh, sorry, Sam. Did you want to go first? Okay, so we we operate our inner loop center like a contact center, and with all of the metrics that go with it. So we do actually track how long to our response. We track how many attempts we make. Obviously, you can't force the customer to pick up the phone when you call, so we don't force that to happen, but we do monitor how often we are able to reach customers and try to use that to allocate our time most effectively. So yes, it's pretty tightly managed.
All right. And that research was that you have 48 hours to initiate contact with a client before they think you don't care. Not to resolve the issue, because sometimes that could take, especially in B2B, a long time, but it's that first initiation. Sam?
Yeah. So when we have feedback coming in, we have a coding mechanism where we kind of categorize it either as a red level concern, a yellow level concern, or a green, which is no concerns. So we have a requirement that anything that is red or yellow gets followed up on. We are working on, as Jim well knows, on getting that timeline in place to make sure that feedback is happening within 48 hours. Sometimes we really like to have a committee meeting about who the best person is to really, follow up and have that follow-up meeting. And instead, we need to prioritize making sure that outreach happens first, and that we're resolving it, over time as need be. Okay. Because some of those concerns do take longer, right? And that's appropriate, but not letting it feel like it falls on deaf ears is also extremely important. So,
all right. Brandon, do you set goals for both timeliness and percentage of who all is responded to?
We give general guidance on kind of best practices around response times, and then we leave it up to those functional areas to decide how they want to implement it themselves. The nice thing is if you close the loop as a matter of practice, like kind of passively, but not actively saying, hey, do you want us to reach back out to you? I think the reality is that those customers don't necessarily have an expectation that you're going to get back with them, and they don't know that you necessarily have a process in place to do that. And so if, for example, we have to slip for a period of time, like if we've shut it down because of a hurricane or something like that, we're not really being held accountable for that by a customer unless maybe they've experienced some time in the past where we've closed the loop with them. So we have a little bit of flexibility to not be super stringent in enforcing any particular SLAs around closing the loop.
Well, so as our B2B2C representative, you get an extra special bonus question, which is, does your closing the loop, the responding individuals vary from your distribution channel, from your end client, policyholder?
Not dramatically, only because, if we, depending on the type of feedback we get, if it generates a case, it's going to generate a case regardless of whether it's an agent or it's a policyholder that's left that feedback. And our customer service team handles both agents and policyholders, and so the mechanism is still pretty much the same. And I'll answer maybe Carolyn's question in here while I answer this about how do we incorporate unstructured data, things like that. So it's really two ways. Is that the unstructured data can actually trigger the case. So we're using text analytics to determine what the nature of the response is, so that we can generate the case based on specific things that we're looking for, phraseology or sentiment. And then we include the unstructured feedback in the case itself. So when we notify that, systematically, when the functional group associated with the case is notified, they actually get to see all the feedback that customer left and how they scored the rest of the survey and how the sentiment was scored, so that they have a head start to be able to do that.
That's got to help a lot.
Mm-hmm. Immensely.
And the last question, I think I said I already had the last question, but one more last question on the responding individually is, we have found that when we first work with a client to implement closed loop, the business typically hates it. The idea of all that time spent going into that, all that work. And so what we do is we almost always find that you build some really big success cases. Like when we did it with a bank, different bank, we had a case where somebody had pulled out $5 million from that bank, and nobody did anything until the survey came back, and then they closed the loop and that money came back. And that changes a lot of minds when you have that. Have any of you had success using storytelling around closed loop to reinforce its importance?
Yeah, we do a lot of both storytelling and it's also extremely data driven. So, again, we're a bank. We've got a lot of people with green eye shades here. They oftentimes do respond to stories that have dollar signs attached to them. And so, we work on building up both sides of that. So we generate a regular cadence of customer stories that get circulated weekly. Here's our individual success stories, and also kind of bundle that up. We've done a lot of really, I think it's kind of cool internal research that demonstrates the dollar value, the retention value of the closed loop process. So we can actually cost justify all that time that we're spending calling customers, which I think is in the past has been a challenge for us. US Bank has a reputation of being kind of on the cheap side, and in a good way. We're good stewards of your money, but people really do want to see that there's an ROI if they're going to be spending money on an activity like this. So we've done the homework to show that value is there, and we can back it up with individual stories.
And as a customer of yours, I appreciate that.
Well, good. And as a customer of ours, Jim, sometimes I say it's good that you don't get to see how the sausage is made too. So
100%. Sam, Brandon, any examples of being able to use storytelling around closed loop to reinforce it?
Yeah, I'll share one just because it's one, like I said, one of my favorite parts of my job is doing those in-person client interviews where I'm able to reach out and really connect with our customers, learn about how our teams are performing for them. And we had a couple of stories early on in our program where the customer basically had some critical feedback, had some big concerns, one in particular I'm thinking of, and they had tried to elevate it through the regular process of, letting their project manager know, hoping the project manager would reach out to the person above them, and it hadn't escalated as it needed to. And once I got that interview with them and raised that feedback, it was escalated to the point that it needed to be to fix the problem. And they told us they would not have become a repeat client of ours if that hadn't happened. So I tell that story a lot of how important it is to, first of all, seek the feedback, gather the feedback. Don't just say I can handle it. But if we need help and we need to elevate the issue to something larger within the organization, it's worth it. And then, yeah, like I said, we have a repeat customer and a great relationship because of it. So I share that story a lot.
I'll bet. Well, let's now move to responding organizationally, or as the jargon says, the outer loop. Because as important as closing the loop is individually with a client, if you don't change anything, it doesn't really matter. It really comes back to how you change things. How do you each service up the themes of the rest of the organization so that action happens? Who'd like to go first?
Yeah, I can tackle that one. So we try to anchor everything in the journey. So on a quarterly basis, we share out with a very broad group of stakeholders the journey performance, and so we share the metrics that we see transactionally as well as relational metrics that we track as well, and we provide insights to those groups on where we're seeing trend differences, or what are some highlights, what are maybe the top 3 positive sentiments this month or this quarter, what are the low 3 sentiments this quarter, to help drive them into action that they can then apply for their group, and then we track that over time. So we can say, hey, if we've provided something as maybe a focal point, and that functional area can focus on that for the next 6 months and see what they can do to improve that, then they're going to get another report a quarter after that and another quarter after that to be able to see the impact from what they did.
Yeah, we do a lot of pain point tracking here, and so we've identified, like our top 10 customer pain points enterprise wide, and we track those on a regular basis to see, and those are fairly broad general things, and we also look for specific pain points that may come up through our inner loop process. One of the challenges that we run into is that if you've got 3-4 customers who had the same pain point, with the scale that we're operating at, sometimes it's hard to get people's attention to fix those problems. So we do spend a fair amount of time just going around the organization and working these ideas and saying, hey, can you fit this into a sprint sometime? Can you find the development resources to maybe clean this up a little bit? And it's sometimes it feels like you're chipping away at a mountain, but you do every now and then you knock a little pebble loose, and it feels pretty good. And every now and then we do something that makes a big dent, and that feels really good. But we do have an extremely long list of pain points that we're working and trying to gain headway on, and then we keep at it, and persistence and being sort of that perfectly calibrated level of annoying to the other parts of the company, I think eventually does have success.
Good, Sam.
Yeah, so we are tracking those and identifying those kind of bigger picture concerns just through analytics primarily from the open-ended feedback we get from our surveys. I love the idea, Brandon, of identifying where on the journey those pain points are happening. Ours kind of just naturally have occurred that way, whereas the feedback is all centered around a certain phase of the process that's been challenging. So after, we do it quarterly, where I provide a summary and provide that to leadership. And we actually, I'm gonna throw it back to Jim a little bit, because we actually are planning on implementing something new. Previously, our plan for closing that loop has been just to take it back to the operational leaders to say, hey, here's the issue. Here's what we think you should do. Here's how we want to follow up on it. And then we've been struggling with getting traction on that a little bit. So we are planning on trying to move to a different approach where we are having a specialized action committee focused on customer experience efforts, and kind of have somebody that's a little more dedicated to fixing those problems, learning more, all that, and then taking that solution to the business to implement. So Jim, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. It's something from part of the customer.
Yeah, it's coming back to something I wanted to ask about the team, which is that it's really having that governance layer, that cross-functional piece to review it. We find that if you don't have governance of some sort, the outer loop doesn't happen, or the responding organizationally, because there's nobody to own it. It's really hard to get them there. So obviously I like that approach since I've recommended it, but it is something that we've seen work quite often. You have a cross-functional team. Peter, Brandon, have you found anything like that where you have some sort of governance function to drive the change that comes from the closed loop?
It's honestly, Jim, it is a challenge here at US Bank because we are a very siloed organization. And so we're doing kind of ad hoc governance where we don't have formal responsibility. We can't go and tell people to do stuff. So we're acting as persuaders. And so, we do within our CX team, try to prioritize and try to identify who should be working on it. But then, we have to build a business case. We can't tell people to fix things, but we can try to gain allies and we can try to build that case and we can try to understand, here's what it means to the customer, but also, oftentimes there's risk considerations. Like if we're dropping the ball somewhere in an activity that we're supposed to legally be doing, we can bring in our risk partners and get them to maybe have a little bit of a bigger hammer than what we have. So, a lot of it is it's informal governance in the sense that, we're not able to at an enterprise level say fix these 10 things, but we can build those cases and make allies and try to move things more organically. I'll just leave it there.
Okay.
Not too dissimilar. We also have to incorporate into the existing organizational processes when it comes to things like that. And so I have members of my team that sit on a lot of committees, for example, when we score our tickets and things like that for prioritization, and we have elements of CX that are built into that scoring mechanism. So again, not that we have a standalone CX process, because that would be another process to add on top of all the other processes within the organization. But as much as possible, we try to integrate into existing processes in order to get some prioritization on these.
Well, you may have seen Carolyn's question on there, which is, do you size it according to your potential for impact, or what criteria do you use to help prioritize that?
Yeah, it's going to primarily be, we're an insurance business, right? So in any kind of financial services, it's going to be financial impact and risk. Those are just kind of straightforward. There's a lot of other parameters, but those two will be priorities. So even from an experience perspective, a frustrated customer is different than a customer who we made an error with, and so that error will get prioritization over a frustration for the most part, right? Just because of the way that we try to prioritize making sure that we're being compliant, and we're so heavily regulated that we need to prioritize regulatory things first.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thing. But the only thing I would add is we also factor in level of effort. So if we've got small wins, that we know are going to be easy, we'll try and get those done quickly. But some things are very large rocks that take a long time to move.
So one of the things I'm interested in, and I did not put it in the Customer Engage research. Again, this is Customer Engage, not a partner. They just have some wonderful research. So Customer Engage, and it's state of the B2B account experience. And one of the things they talked about, we haven't discussed here, is the importance of closing the loop at all levels. And what they mean by that is when you have your senior executives also responding to frustrated customers, it appears to drive way more organizational change than if it's done by a focus group. And I don't know if any of you have gotten to the point yet where you have your senior executives responding to frustrated customers. Anybody gotten there?
We have.
No.
I
will tell you, Jim, though, I have seen and observed that in prior lives at other companies, that if there's one thing that will drive improved CX, it is getting that direct, get the people in the C-suite, get the CEO to talk to customers directly. And I've talked to people at other companies that have implemented processes like that. It really does move the needle. We are not there yet. We've got a long journey ahead of us before we get there.
Sam, let's hear about from you.
Yeah, I'm super lucky. I consider myself one of the lucky ones when I talk to other CX practitioners, and that I have really excellent support in the C-suite for the customer experience. They just know it's foundational to the business. And so actually early on in our program, we were having trouble with some of that going back to the jargon, the inner loop closing, just getting people to respond individually and close the loop with clients. C-suite saw it was a problem and just said, hey, for the time being, copy us on everything. And so we started doing that, which was a little bit scary. And we've had to do a little bit of tweaking and work to make sure that we're not having like senior leaders jump onto problems prematurely, letting the teams handle it first as they're able, if they're able. But that accountability is just innately there now because leadership knows what's going on and they're getting copied on that. And so they won't insert themselves into an issue unless it's really needed and we needed to escalate it. But if they already have an established relationship with that client, if they were a part of the pursuit phase or the sell, or they've got any of that kind of existing relationship there, they absolutely step in and, say thanks for the feedback or reach in to assure them that it's getting the support and attention that it needs. And it's been a big difference maker for us.
Well, bet. I prefer something like that where it's something where you manage, put it up there. I remember when I was at a conference, I saw a vendor who had a software what would specifically send specific feedback to executives to respond to on their phones. And that always made me nervous. I prefer a little bit more control that it goes out directly there because I don't know if you've ever seen the Jeff Bezos question mark email comments where people would email him directly and he would just forward email to the leader with just a question mark and they knew they'd better get on it. That always made me a little bit nervous there.
Yeah, I will add in there is a moment of pause in that ours is not an automated process yet. So I always have the opportunity to kind of give folks a heads up if there's a super critical or negative comment coming in so they can get a minute to breathe before C-suite asks them what's going on. But yeah.
So we had a question here from Hamdi asking, do you measure the percentage of closing the loop and do a root cause analysis? So I haven't heard anything like that. I don't know if you do anything on that. What
do we mean by percentage of closing the loop? As in percentage of customers reached, percentage satisfied?
I'm not sure how many of you can give us a little more detail there, but let's go more to the root cause analysis. Is that something you're doing in your groups? Are you sending over to the business to do that? Where does that happen?
Yeah, we track all those things. We track the percentage of customers reach. We track the percentage of customers that we were able to satisfy once we reached them. And there is root cause analysis that's done within our closed loop team. That's how we generate that long list of pain points in order to help prioritize what we actually want to work on. So we are doing very intensive tracking at all stages there.
So we did just post out that article. I should have posted it proactively, but since Lori asked, I thought, okay, let's go ahead and get that out there. So we do have that out there on the chat and get it there. Yeah, it's a long report. I think it's something like 100 pages long, but chock full of good information. And especially not just on closing the loop, also on different survey outcomes. They do heavily focus on NPS. You may or may not agree with that, but it is really good research regardless. And so I highly recommend taking a look at that. Well, we're coming up to the end of our time here. I just want to go around the room and ask you so what I found when we work with new clients is that relatively few of them have a structured closing the loop program. Now, clearly you all three have a very thorough program. I would like you to pull out your inner Jim. No, that's wrong. Anyway, just your own thoughts and say, what would you say to that client that says, yeah, we just don't close a loop today? How would you address that and help them understand the importance of why it's absolutely crucial for them to close the loop? Who'd like to start? Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I would say to that person, first and foremost, would you like a company that you've just left feedback for to close the loop with you? Would that be beneficial to you, right? Bring that human element into it to try to break through that kind of business barrier that sometimes causes us to make decisions that are less than human that we would do if it was us, right, in those shoes. That would be the first question. And then the second one would be to really understand what business value could be had to complement that human value on the customer side. and offer to step in and provide evidence, right, to use benchmarking like in the research that Jim shared here, to be able to do maybe some small scale studies on your own to see the difference between customers that, if you get a lift out of retention or spend or whatever it is, have a real clear understanding of the outcome measures you want to try to impact by closing the loop, and then be able to build that mechanism. And you don't have to be super scientific out the door, right? Don't let perfection get in the way of progress here. But intuitively, people can believe that this will help, right? And then so just find some of those instances where you can actually show, maybe even at one customer level, right? You close the loop for with a customer who said, "I'm never going to bank with you again," and then you find 2 months later that they've bought a home loan through you or something like that. That's really good evidence that can help fuel that case for closing the loop.
Excellent.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Brandon just said, and I would also add, what is the purpose of doing the survey in the first place? I mean, most of us are not doing surveys just for the sake of doing a survey. I mean, maybe some people are, but for the most part, we're doing surveys because we want to improve business outcomes. And closing the loop is the mechanism through which you can improve business outcomes. And again, being a very data-driven large organization, we've done our homework here at US Bank. We know that it works. We know that it's got net positive value to do it. We know that it's making a difference with our customers. Now, smaller companies, you may have to take a certain amount of that on faith or listen to the other experts, but it works. And if you're not doing it, then why are you doing the survey in the first place? You're just measuring numbers to no purpose. So I feel very strongly about making sure that that's an integral part of any program.
Sam, let's share the faith, share the belief.
Yeah, I was going to lead off with the very first thing that Brandon said, is that just put yourself in a customer's shoes with any business that you've done. If you're willing to give that feedback, you expect something out of it, right? I think we all just can innately know that the business landscape is different in the last few years, that people are expecting to interact not just with the business, but the human side of the business. They're expecting that there are people working for this company and that they're going to be able to talk to and connect to people. So in a world of AI, it's a way to be really human, is to just directly respond to people and give that feedback. And then obviously, and just what Peter and Brandon said with finding that ROI and finding that connection, it's like, if you don't close the loop with these folks, there's the potential for lost customer base. And it is so much more expensive to get a new customer, or generally, depending on your business, it's more expensive to get a new customer than to retain an existing one. So that's just like a basic business metric that you could kind of fall back on.
Excellent. And that's really, it is about creating human experience. It's about building that retention. And it's a great question. Peter asks, well, why else are you doing the survey? We're not doing a survey just for a net promoter score. Hopefully, it is to change the business, to improve the business around customer needs. So well said, all of you. I want to thank my three panelists. I've sent out a panicky email on, I think it was Friday. They all said, yes, Jim, we can help. And then Peter, who has not had, do you have power yet, Peter?
Yeah, we had a big storm on Monday and our power was out for 24 hours. So I had to kind of scramble to get all the ducks in the row. So combine that with our US Bank risk and compliance policies, and people are telling me, Jim, I got approval to be here in record time. I want you to know.
All right, much appreciated. Thank you, Sam, Peter, and Brandon, for sharing with us your experience with closed loop practices. If you want to look at your own closed loop practice, you want to implement it at your organization, love to help you out. Give me a call. I think any of us will be available on LinkedIn, and we'd love to continue the conversation. Thank you, panel, for your time today. All you have to give is your time, and you gave it to our community. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Good talking with you all. Great questions, too.
All right.